Welcome to the Macedon Podcast. All the expressions that you will hear in the following podcast are from his moderator and he only. They do not reflect the opinions of our sponsors and anyone who's making this possible. It's just his opinion, okay? So without further ado, welcome to the Macedon Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this new edition for the Macedon Podcast. My name is Marcel Macedon Cruz, and I'm really pleased that you're with me today, or wherever you're choosing to hear this. So, first off, I want to explain. Last weekend, it was 420. It was kind of an awkward 420 part, a really important part of what we're going to be speaking of today, but we didn't record our usual podcast because we were working alongside Free Juana Foundation in Puerto Rico, so we could bring you the virtual rally of 2020. It was really fun. Over 21,908 people tuned into view. That's only the Facebook numbers. That's without the numbers of the live feeds and streams that were around Instagram and other social media. So it was really huge, about 15 hours of entertainment. We had actually everything. We had an auction, we had a lot of live artists, we had reggae, we had drum and bass, we had our original scene lined up. It was really fun, and it's really ironic that it was really fun because entering this event, it was kind of an experiment, and it served as a way, as an inspiration for the podcast that we're doing just right now. Well, it's really something. I've seen a lot of people throughout many social media claiming that some people are kind of tired of the COVID-19 theme and the coronavirus theme, but the thing is that it's a theme that is all around us, and one of the main things that struck me the most when all of this started, and I remember that in the last podcast I was praising Cardi B as a coronavirus whistleblower, but when it really started sinking into my head what was really happening, it was when I started seeing the shows that I tend to watch, because we make shows, but we also watch shows. We call that fact that we are human beings. And there's a lot of shows that I watch. I'm a wrestling fan, so it was even worse. So I started my first what the fuck experience was with the John Oliver Last Week Tonight, when I saw that John Oliver was doing it in what he is calling the White Void. And it was really creepy because I couldn't tell if he was in a really professional studio or where he was exactly. All we knew for the information that Oliver gave us is the fact that his studio, someone gave a positive to coronavirus, so they decided to get outside the studio. So I believe it is his home, but it was really striking. It's the right word. The fact that there was no audience, and the audience is really, that's when you click the part of how important the audience is, especially in shows like John Oliver and like late night shows and shows like wrestling, and especially in sports. But the thing is that I started watching the show, and it was like, typical John Oliver, but the feeling that it had surrounding it was so eerie, and I was like, oh my god. And I started seeing all these shows that they're using their typical studios, but they are using, for example, crew members instead of an audience, and they're sitting like 6 feet apart, promoting social distancing. And then I came across wrestling. I'm a wrestling fan, but before a wrestling fan, for as long as I have had a memory, I have been embedded into the entertainment business. I'm a third generation musician, so since I have a recollection, I've been surrounded by instruments, I've been surrounded by music. And one of the aspects was music, the first thing that I was brought up to, but the thing that I started getting since I was a kid, really passionate about wrestling, because it was like a complete package. You're telling me a story, you're using music to enhance that story, and besides, this is people, putting their bodies at risk to tell this story. And from the beginning, I had, even being a kid, I had the suspicion that everything here is like kind of fake or fixed. But I didn't care. As I got older, I was like, I was trying to deny it. But what I was doing was like denying it, like getting it into the back of my head and still enjoy it as much as I can. I've been a wrestling fan my whole life. There's one of the podcasts, one of the Mastodon podcasts, in which I talked about this, and to the point that I even witnessed on pay-per-view, I was watching the pay-per-view in which Owen Hart died. That In Your House pay-per-view, 1997, if I'm not mistaken. No, the Montreal Screwjob was in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. Or 1997, it was In Your House, 1998. Yeah, that was kind of a messed up year for WWF at the time, now WWE. Because it was the same year that Mankind is literally stage dive from Hell in a Cell. So it was really a creepy year for wrestling. But one of the main things that wrestling, and way more than late shows, because late shows, what an audience do is that they give reaction, they give a backup to many jokes that the host or someone is saying, and they give reactions that enhance the feelings of the people who are watching in the home. But the thing is that in wrestling, the audience goes way beyond that. The audience is kind of a jury and judge system all blended into one, in which they decide if this guy or this girl, they're going to be good, they're going to be bad. And even though the company that is the promotion company, each wrestling promotion company, has their idea on mind on how they're going to move this wrestler, how they're going to tell that story, the audience tends to have this power to shift that. One good example in the WWF, now WWE, Attitude Era was huge example is Stone Cold Steve Austin. This is the guy who was swearing at everybody. He was the painful, insulting, evil, like badass, and that badass factor turned him into a babyface, because he was this rebellious figure who was standing up. And a good recent example is what the final story, well, not the final one, but one of the famous pipe bomb storyline from CM Punk, in which they go all like out of character to rebel against their bosses and breaking the fourth wall, and showing that they can step on into authority. And the thing with stories like this is the importance of the audience. Because at that point, Stone Cold Steve Austin and CM Punk, they were slated to be bad guys. But the thing is that the audience loved that performance so much that they turned them into baby faces. They turned them face. So when we move on from that, the audience in wrestling, they even decide, they have a participation on how that outcome will play out. So by having that participation, this is a kind of audience that goes in a weight of importance way beyond a typical talk show, a typical late night show. So when I started, I started digging into a lot of shows. And there was a good example before I get to that dreadful moment in which I started watching specifically Raw, and I was watching also AEW Dynamite. So I'm going to talk about both shows. The thing is that I started I started digging into another shows like Trevor Noah, who uses the audience but have been witty enough, and sometimes his pace is a little bit so fast, and I don't mean it in a bad way. He just goes so he's like rams the joke in a way that he's so fast that the audience in his show, it's not like it's irrelevant, but comparing it to Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, in which the audience give that huge boost, he kind of tends to grab more control. So in the case of Trevor Noah, what he did, he started doing the show in his living room, and he was really accurate on what he was doing. He was doing the show on his living room. He was not using, unlike John Oliver, which he was using his typical suit. He was using like a sweater, and he was like in typical home clothing. So the Trevor Noah social distancing show became a little bit more comfortable to watch, because it was a little bit more striking to home, a little bit more homey, a little bit more cozy, because it's the right word to use here. It's a little bit more cozy. So when the Trevor Noah show started, I started watching it. I felt like, okay, I kind of can settle in with this new reality. Maybe it's not so bad. It's temporarily, so, well, we can get used to this for a while. It's not so bad. It wasn't like this eerie, creepy impression that I got from last week tonight with John Oliver and his white boy, in which like, oh God, we're fucked. There's no audience. Like, the rapture is going on right here. And to be fair, it's the fact that of the timing itself, It was when the news were really rampant. There were a lot of people dying in Italy. For example, I even watched a video of this guy whose sister died. And her corpse was just right behind him, and you were starting to see these places in which there were stockpiling corpses, and it started to get really creepy. And that was in the same time that I stumbled upon the new format of John Oliver's show. So it's not like I'm shitting on John Oliver. It's like it's the timing, and it was the impact of no audience. And then I go to Trevor Noah and the View, and okay, this is something temporarily, so I can get used to this. So I kept going on, and then I decided, based on what I actually told you about wrestling and the importance of the audience in wrestling, I decided, so what the hell, I'm going to watch Monday Night Raw. That's the worst it could happen. But then the worst happened. It turns out WWE moved its programming to the Performance Center only with the stars. Unlike, I was kind of expecting that I wasn't going to get audience. I was kind of curious if they were going to put the crew out, but they didn't do that either. So they're keeping this social distancing standards. They're having matches, but, well, they were normal matches, but it was really like, when I started watching it, I was kind of froze, I can say. And when I started watching all of that, I was like, oh my God, this is like a practice. I'm watching a practice for Monday Night Raw, and they didn't give me the program, so they retransferred the practice. And it was really striking. The fact of two wrestlers. We're talking about this. Wrestling has been around for we're in the year 2020. We're talking about wrestling is something that is, many people see it popular between the 60s and 70s, but it was way before that. We're talking about the one of the peak points of wrestling was around the 1940s, and it has been around since the 1920s. The format that we know already. So mostly in the 40s, it was when it was taking more of the theatrical turn. So we're talking about an 80-year-old industry. Okay? 80 years, almost 100 years there. So this is an industry that has been built upon audience and audience and audience and audiences. So seeing that there was no audience, the fact of wrestling itself entirely, it's the fact that you're seeing a match with a bunch of crazy fans screaming. even if they're insulting the wrestlers or whatever, but they're screaming, and those screams